guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp, and thanks so much. This is Starlite Pulpcast number 20. So welcome. And tonight we've got Mr. Owen King with us, which I very much appreciate him coming by. He's got a new book out called The Curator. Just came out, I believe, a month or two ago. Yep.
Yeah, a few months ago.
Yeah.
Like March, but
So
ago.
yeah, so we're going to talk about that tonight quite a bit. So Owen, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I love
Are
doing
you in
this stuff.
Los Angeles?
I'm from LA originally. Right now I'm in Palm Springs. It's
Okay.
literally, even at this time, it's about 1:15 outside, I think.
Right.
But yeah, I'm in Palm Springs right now.
All right,
So
cool.
so talk to me about the Curator. So first off, just let me give kind of just a brief intro here. The Curator is what, if you were to put a gun to my head, I would say that probably a fantasy novel is the closest approximation to a category I would put on it. And it also feels at points like a Victorian novel. I know that um, your Simon and Schuster said that it was kind of a Dickensian fairy tale, if you will, right, or fantasy. So it has that working, but really, Dora is the protagonist. She's also called Dee at one point early in the book. She says that her brother gave her the fourth letter in the alphabet, right? So she goes by Dee quite a bit. There's Lieutenant Robert Barnes, who's a love interest, as well as Ike. And then, but really, the crux of the novel is kind of, she's really trying to figure out the Museum of Psychical. Is it psychical? Is that the way to pronounce it?
Well, she's in the Museum of the National Worker.
Right.
Right. And there's a building next door that was the Society for Psychical Research, which is actually, there is a real place
Okay.
in London, but it's spelled different. Mine's got a K,
Right.
there's a C. And that's a place that has a history of that goes way back, and studying magic and telekinesis. And I mean, I don't know all that much about it, but I knew I had read something about it, and the name stayed in my mind. And in my my novel, the stuff that they research is real. Magic is real, other worlds are real, but that building where all that happened has burned down. And that's the place that my character wants to go, because as a child her brother died, but her brother was involved with the people that ran the society. So she ends up, after this revolution has occurred, she ends up taking the curatorship, sort of a custodial role, taking care of the building next door, which is the National Museum of the Worker.
Yeah.
And everything else on the street is like the National Museum of the Worker. It's all a bunch of museums and archives, and I think there's one that's a school. There's all these little buildings on the street, and that they all seem to be for the education of an incredibly particular small group.
Right.
And it raises a lot of questions right from the beginning, like, something is odd here. Something doesn't make sense, that nothing on this street is something that anybody would actually want, or not very many people would want.
Right.
And one of the things, of course, Dora's point of view is super working class, and one of the very first things she thinks about, because she's a former domestic servant, one of the things she thinks about once she gets the curatorship of this museum is, working people don't want to go to a museum to see the wax figures working their jobs. They want to go do something fun on the weekend, right? So yeah, I mean, the book is, I think, the anytime Dickens comes up, super flattering as far as I'm concerned. Couldn't be more enthusiastic, basically, about everything he ever wrote. And in the case of The Curator, I was certainly partly inspired by the novel Little Dorrit, which is about it's the one that's closest to Dickens's own life. It's about a family in a debtor's prison, And little Dorrit, Amy Dorrit, the daughter of the family, the youngest daughter, she spends all her time working for her family to try to get them out of debt, out of the debtor's prison, and she ends up getting entangled in I don't know exactly how to describe it, in a long family mystery that has to do both with her own family and with another family called the Clennams. And I love that particular novel. But one of the things that I tried to do with the Curator is, if Dora is kind of a very distant echo of little Dorrit, I wanted to make her feel more like a contemporary woman, and I wanted her to be a little more like little Dora is kind of saintly almost.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and I wanted Dora to be a heroine that felt a little more contemporary and a little more flawed, because that makes me like her more and relate to her more, and she does have her dark side.
Sure. And so in this you've got the backdrop is, because what I didn't mention, right, I was going over the characters, what I didn't mention is the backdrop. You've got this revolution,
That's right, yeah.
right, that has just, or it just occurred, or and so and you've got things like the events leading to the overthrow of the crown's government, kind of thing, in terms of chapters, and providing some background. And then of course she's trying to find out about her brother Ambrose as well, who died of cholera, right? So
Yep.
So you've got all of this working with just a whole plethora of characters as well. So how did you work to tie in so many kind of loose elements from this story into something that works this well?
Well, I think that one of the strategies I adopted was that D is the main character, and so everything it's always coming back to her. So she's like the straight line of the story,
Yeah.
and what she's doing. But because the society that she's living in is quasi-Victorian, it's a very patriarchal society.
Yeah.
She's a single woman with no resources, or very limited resources. She has some after the revolution, but it's not a lot. And she has to be careful, and she's super smart. So one of the limitations of the story is that she never she wouldn't go somewhere carelessly, right? I always hate that, like when everybody hates that in movies, right? When the protagonist like goes back in the house, you're like, why would you go back? Go call the police, right?
Right.
So she does endanger, she does risk herself, especially in the sort of third act of the book. But so she is on this one journey, trying to figure out what happened to her brother, and that's going on. And then threading back and forth through that are the stories of these different characters that are in the city that are contemporaneous.
Sure.
And those characters hopefully help the reader track the larger political story,
Right.
and expand the world, and hopefully help the tension gathering and the sense of forces closing in on her, and danger getting closer from the outside going in, excuse me. So I mean, it is tricky, but I mean, one of the things that I like about modern television and shows like The Nick or The Wire or Happy Valley and shows like that is that they have these big casts of characters, but there's usually like a center line. And I remember the somebody said something about I remember there was a famous quote about The Wire saying it was Dickensian, right? And to me, that's dead on, because those Victorian novels like Little Dorrit or like Elizabeth Gaskell novels. You can go on, they're oftentimes written in a way so there's like an episode, and the novel is like that,
Mhm.
and so um it is meant to be that way. I mean, obviously it's not, I don't want to compare myself to, these huge figures of the
Sure.
19th century,
Right.
but it's meant to function in the same way
Right.
as that.
Okay, and so that kind of segues right in because I had a question here that I wanted to ask you about the chapter titles because your chapter titles,
Yeah.
I mean, so many books, right, are chapter one, chapter two, or there's or there's part one, chapter two, that kind of thing. Yours are in the Curator. We're looking at like the Salute and Listen and events leading to the overthrow of the Crown's government, part one or part two, or so it's almost like each one is they're almost like short story titles,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah, they're all supposed to have like a little arc, right? Like the story is there's like a big arc, and then all those little characters, they have their own little arcs, and they're all the characters are supposed to, I mean, I'm trying to make them really pop. I want them to be a little outsized. Um, as that's what I'm into, and that's what fits with the world.
right.
It's a little bit incredible, and so the people inside it are a little bit outsized.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when I spend a chapter with a character, it's like that character is the star of that mini episode.
Right.
That's like the other half. If it was like a 60-minute TV episode, it's like one half is that mini episode and the other half
Right.
is dialogue. But
Right.
if you actually watch the TV show, you'd be threading them back and forth. You'd be cutting.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool. So when you plan out a novel like this, and this is actually honestly just as a writer, this is just interesting to me because everybody's so different. When you plan out a novel, especially like this one, which is almost in the neighborhood of 450 pages, right? And like we've been discussing, it's very kind of it covers a lot, a lot of characters, a lot of things going on, the revolution and everything else, and quite frankly, in a world that you've pretty much created from scratch, right? So when you're going to do something like that, do you how do you plan out the book? Do you outline it beforehand? Do you kind of brainstorm and just have some ideas, or do you just kind of have some loose ideas and just go from there?
Yeah, well, the book is based on a short story. It was a long short story, but it was only the story was just her in the museum. She was a slightly different character.
Hmm.
The revolution goes on, but you're never outside the museum where she
Okay.
spends her time, where she's trying to figure this thing out, figure out her family history. And one of the things, and I just wrote the story. I had like a first sentence came to mind, and I thought about it, and like 15 minutes later, I was like, okay, I think I know what's going to happen. It just came to me, which doesn't happen that frequently. I have to tell you, but I wish it did come to me more like that. But so I had this idea, and I wrote the story really quickly, and it just came out, just fit like I wanted it to, which again doesn't happen all that often the first time through.
Sure.
Usually you have to
Right.
wrestle with something. And I was really happy with it, and people responded to it. And one of the things that in thinking about the story, was like I just knew all the things that were outside the museum, and
Right.
I understood all the things that were happening, and I was interested in spreading out and getting building the world that I sensed around the walls
Hmm.
of the museum. And I also wanted to um, give more of a I wanted to give more of a history to D, and I wanted to give more of a future to her in a way.
Hmm.
And but then once I started writing the novel, so I had the general um movement just from the story, because the story was like 40 pages.
Hmm.
All the different stages of the revolution are happening outside of the
Right.
walls of the museum, so I could track it in my mind. Um, and so I had some ideas for the things I wanted to add, and so I would sort of move out and get those, and then come back to that main line I had already written. But then, as anybody who writes a short story, writes a novel based on a short story, a lot of things changed. And by
Right.
the time I was through, I had all these signposts that were really useful, and they helped me get through the book. But the book and the short story, they feel related, but
Hmm.
there's like no
Hmm.
words left. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like all the words changed, and it's basically totally different things about characters with the same names. I don't know if I did a great job describing that, but I guess that
No, I get what you're saying
the
though. Yeah.
big thing about planning this particular book was I think it's hard to write a story that is so has so many characters and plot lines, like multiple plot lines instead of just like two or three. When
Right.
it's more like six or seven,
Hmm.
it's hard to do that, I think, without an outline. But in this
Hmm.
case, helped. Um, I did track those things in a kind of outline-ish document, but I was hugely supplemented by the existence of the original story that told me
Sure.
when certain things were going to happen, like
Gotcha.
certain big moments, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah. No, totally. It's interesting how, how differently different authors work, because some people, whole outline beforehand and then they don't even deviate from it that much, although scenes will surprise you sometimes and things like that. And other people, there's an old James Lee Burke quote. I can only assume he's being facetious, but he said the thing you need to do is sit down and write one great sentence, and when you're done with that, write another one.
Right.
As if there's no planning whatsoever. You just they just appear magically. And so it's always interesting to me to talk to different writers about whatever process they might have, because and I don't know about you, but for me personally, it also depends on the individual piece, because sometimes things will just come really easily, like you were mentioning earlier,
Yeah.
and other times it's just, man, you're pulling teeth. um and
Well,
so it's
ultimately, don't you think it just comes down to you're trying to find a way to trick yourself into having the confidence to do this thing,
uh
right? Because,
Yeah, no,
like,
I think that's probably right, because there are so many things that you, as a writer, you sit there and you go, can I do that? I think
yeah.
I can I do that, right? I think I can pull it off, but and then sometimes you're not really sure until you actually see yourself do it.
Well, and I think about an outline too. It's a lot of people are like, oh, well, an outline was really important, and the way it's described, they make it seem as though that's not writing too.
Right, yeah.
Right. I
Yeah,
mean, it's funny. I think you have James Elroy in the background there. And I seem to
yeah,
remember
yeah, I've got a
reading,
few.
I apologize to him if he listens to this later and I'm wrong about this, but I seem to remember reading something about some book that he wrote, and
Mhm.
the outline was like longer than the book. And to me, that's like just a supplemental. I mean, it's like its own document, its
Yeah,
own struggle. If you,
it it's almost like a
it's part of the
it's almost
thing.
like a first draft, right? I mean, if you're
It's
going to do that,
almost like a first. Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, I was actually going to talk to you about that later, because White Jazz is back there, and I heard you mention on the podcast at one point. We'll bring it up later, but you mentioned that you had to read that on
I did,
audiobook when you were
it's
12 or
funny. I'm not a I read White Jazz when I was younger on tape for my dad. It was a
Mhm.
job, and I didn't get it at all, man.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
I,
I
I
do
can imagine.
not understand what is happening in this book. And then I reread it probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I wouldn't say that I loved the book, but I did get the book. And the
Right,
things, and I would say that I really was into it um, for like maybe half, three quarters, and then I think something broke down for me. Uh, but it was one of those experiences that's really rare where you pick up a book that defeated you and you get a lot out of it,
right,
you know.
right. Yeah.
And so I was glad because when I did read it, I don't know, it just skated over my head. And
Mhm. Yeah.
the first time, and then when I went back and I of course was familiar with L.A. Confidential, it's a great
Sure.
film,
Of course.
and I recognized how I've not read the novel L.A. Confidential, but clearly a lot of the movie is from White Jazz, right?
Hmm.
Seems like bits for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I and maybe that helped me a little bit, but I mean the things about it that were good were really, really good to me, and I don't know. I should read some more Elroy at some point, but that left me with such a good feeling. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I'm like that
Hmm.
with writers sometimes, like
Hmm.
read a book or two by them and it's really great.
Hmm.
There's a lot of great books out there, so maybe I'm not gonna
There are.
read all those books.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just leave it with a really strong feeling of one or two.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's an interesting point, because you do look sometimes at a writer's, collection or canon or whatever that they've put out. And, if you're looking at somebody with 40, 50 books, I mean, it's intimidating to sit there and go, I'm going to knock out this whole guy's oeuvre.
Right, right.
So,
No, and I mean I'm a pretty slow reader. Yeah, I mean and Elroy probably, I don't know how many books he's written. He's probably written 20 books, and some of those
mhm.
things, you could kill, you know, an animal with some of those
Oh
things. They're
yeah.
huge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Some of them are pretty big.
Um,
Yeah.
and he's writing with, you know, if all the books are like White Jazz, like quite a bit of density.
Yeah. Most of them are. Yeah. Yeah.
And so and the POV, what is the POV is always like strong, super strong, and like, so you're having to adapt your head to a pretty hard
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's Elroy's pretty consistent that way. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So one thing, getting back to the Curator, one thing that I find so funny in it uh, is it kind of maybe this is because of the revolution, but it kind of seems like anybody that wants a certain job can just have that job. Like,
Yep.
even at the end with the old lady, where she turns to Dee and says, "Do you want my job?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dora has to apologize for not wanting her job. And
Yeah.
so where did that come from?
Well, I mean, the idea is that there's been this revolution, and these
Mhm.
wealthy elites, this aristocracy,
Right.
um, has been thrown out, but they haven't been defeated. They're encamped on the outside of the city
Right.
on the highway, and so in the meantime, these very idealistic university students have uh, uh, you know made common cause with uh, a bunch of organized labor figures,
Mhm.
and somebody has to, and their sort of ambitions are very socialist,
Mhm.
and they're very idealistic. They want to create a more equitable socialist society, but at least the university student part of it, these are themselves the children of elites, right?
Right.
They don't exactly know what they're getting into. Um, and so in the meantime, they want people to step into positions to sort of take care of the country's wealth,
Mhm.
So somebody's got to, and this, you think about it, this would happen in a revolution. Who's going to look after the art museum and make sure it
Mhm.
doesn't get looted?
Mhm.
Because all these things belong to the people now, right? It's
Right.
not no longer the property of the crown. It's the people's, uh, it should be a source of wealth to them. And so Dora and all these other people are, you know, sort of take oaths to this revolutionary group while they're setting up a new government, and
Mhm.
they act as, um, in a position to take care of these national treasures, if you will.
Right.
Uh, well, something has worked out, but it turns out establishing the new government and getting things operating is extremely difficult,
Mhm.
more difficult even than it should be, because there's these forces working in the background to stop it from
Right.
happening.
Right.
So,
Yeah. It kind of reminded me in a funny way of I read a lot of westerns too, and so oftentimes in West, I was just reading a Larry McMurtry one. I think it was Streets of Laredo a while back,
uh-huh.
and it's kind of like in the Old West, that happened a lot of times too. It was like, okay, we're going to set up a town here. Hey, I've read the Bible before. Okay, you're the new preacher. Like, it's just like, I've worked with horses before. Okay, you're the leather and tack guy.
Yeah.
And that's, it's just, that's how things happen. In that particular book I was talking about, a guy that, grows up around the Texas Rangers, gets old enough to be a Texas Ranger, and it's kind of like, well, we've known him his whole life, so sure, come on in. And now it's funny because you think about the hoops people have to jump through in order to get a job, and so I got a kick out of that with the Curator. So,
Yeah, but I
yeah,
mean, the thing is also is that, I mean, Dora herself, and one of the things that I liked about writing the character is she is, she's perpetually underestimated, even by people like Robert, who are supposed to be her ally.
right.
She's in a relationship with this man, but he even underestimates her constantly.
Yeah.
And so the fun of it, and the reason why she was sort of undoubtedly my favorite character I've ever written about, is that it's
That's
fun.
awesome.
She's always actually the smartest, cleverest, thinking two steps ahead, and despite the flaws that hopefully make her real to a reader, she is able to overcome, a considerable number of obstacles, and it makes it sweeter, hopefully for the reader, because she is so constantly underestimated and undervalued.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people can relate to that too.
Yeah, of course.
So that's part of it that works really well with her.
Yeah.
So I want to talk real quick about a couple things that I read with regards to the Curator. So two reviews I read. One said that this is very clearly an allegory for the January 6th insurrection, and another one said this is a very clearly a statement on the current political climate in the U.S. And so I was just curious as to your thoughts on that. You don't want to talk about politics, you don't have to at all.
Yeah.
I don't care about that. It's just it's always interesting to me when other people look at your work and go, well, clearly this is what this person's saying. So
yeah, I mean, definitely definitely doesn't have anything to do with January 6th, because I think I wrote it mostly before then.
Okay.
But it does, I mean, I think it's pretty typical for a book to be responding to things subconsciously, right? If I wrote a book about, I don't know, adventurers on Mars, it would still contain something of today.
Sure. Yeah.
Undoubtedly. I don't know what it would be, but there'd be something to be like, oh, that's because of this thing that we were all watching, this thing that went down. But if I was thinking about any particular thing, I think that the revolution has something in common with Occupy Wall Street.
Okay.
And the sort of the mood of Occupy Wall Street, and what they were the protesters, and what they were responding to, with regards to the way that wealth was being used by the big firms. I think that there's a little bit of that in there for sure, but it's been filtered through this out of time setting. It's like, there's no cars, there's no Wall Street.
Yeah.
They've got trams and horses and things like that, and it's more like, it's meant to be sort of a combination of Victorian London and Victorian Vienna, and 5 Points, New York. It's all these older places than that, and it's filtered through. But yeah, I think that I'm certainly not bothered by those kinds of takes. And I mean, everybody, when you write something, you read a review, it's like there's almost always, not always, but you'll find things that will bum you out, right? But ultimately, you have to step back and realize that, you wrote a book, and you did what you wanted to do,
Mhm.
hopefully, and now it doesn't really belong to you anymore.
Right.
And
True.
people get to read a book any way they want,
Hmm.
you know? Um, you know, somebody can read a book and be like, well, I don't like it. There wasn't enough color blue.
Hmm.
Right.
Of
And
course.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's the
Yeah.
craziest thing ever. But they have every right to be like the reader that wants the color blue in their book. I don't know. I mean, everybody has a
Absolutely.
can you get to read a book on whatever, particular terms that you want to read it on. And um that's the reader's prerogative.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, I think you put it pretty aptly, but the when you write a book and you actually do put it out, as opposed to sharing it with, whomever, friends and family in your writer circle, the once it becomes somebody else's, at that point it's a hallowed place on their bookshelf or kindling, and that's entirely up to them,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true, it's and I think that there are people that are able to like totally disconnect. But I think for most people it'd be unnatural not to, be like, well, that's not right.
Mhm.
But it is.
Yeah.
It's right for them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's one brief passage here I want to read, and it's from the New York Times review
Sure.
of the Curator, and I thought it was interesting. I read a decent amount of reviews, and I thought this particular one was interesting, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. It said this novel is richly imagined, its surface pleasures deliberately subverted by the bleak suggestion at its core that a successful organized attempt to reduce inequity will have to overcome not just the inertia of a nation's politics, but human nature itself.
I think that's true.
Okay, okay.
I mean, I think that that's is it Dexter Palmer that wrote that?
I honestly don't know. I couldn't
Yeah,
tell
I
you.
think that's
I
Dexter Palmer. I
I
mean,
I took it off the site, but I didn't leave his name on
it's
it.
terrific. Right, I think that's who wrote that review.
Mhm.
But that's really well said, and I think that the that seems reflective to me of what I wanted and what I want in pretty much anything I write, which is for the characters to feel real, and that has to do with them being people who have very positive qualities in some cases, but even people who have positive qualities have, uh, you know, th- things pulling them in other directions, uh, counterproductive desires or wants or selfishnesses. That's just a word I just made up, but that there is no there's like no pure heroes,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they don't interest me anyway. The idea doesn't interest me at all.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's not.
Well, when I read that passage originally, and the reason that I chose it for this is because it seemed to me like when I read it, there was a truism in there that kind of struck me. I was like, oh yeah, I can actually, that one I can see. There's a lot of them you read and go, okay, but this one was like, yeah, okay, I can see that. So I just wanted
Yeah,
to get your thoughts on it.
and lots of people, and I that is just a um it's it's hard. People have uh, their own agendas, and
Of course.
they want the best for other people. We all want the best for each other. A lot of us do. I hope. I think I do. Uh, but there's still things that I want, and it's not. There's not a lot of pure people, and that's also why I hope that it's more, or I find it more compelling when a character who's flawed and conflicted does the right thing,
Hmm.
or and
Yeah.
especially even more so when it's a group of people like that
Hmm.
band together because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to
100%.
find common ground. It's hard to work together. Um, so yeah, I was hugely grateful for that interpretation of the book for sure.
Excellent. Okay. So let's I want to talk to you real quick. First off, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on Sleeping Beauties, but Sleeping Beauties was a book you co-authored. I loved that book.
Thanks so much.
I had an absolute blast with it. And so but I listened to the audiobook, which I had mentioned to you before. I listened to the audiobook of it. And so in the for those that don't know, and I'm hoping I don't butcher this, but Sleeping Beauties, essentially all of the women in the world, when they fall asleep on a certain day,
You
they
stay asleep.
they so it depends on where they are in the world and that kind of thing. But when they go to bed, they don't wake up, and they get cocooned essentially.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing left but men, and I mean, I think we both know that that's a terrible uh,
Right.
realism to have to live. And so it's the book about the men struggling with what to do, and the story itself takes place in Appalachia, but it's happening all over the world at this
Yeah.
time. And it's a blast to read, or in my case to listen to. But at the end of the book, there's a little interview with you and your dad, and at one point you said, because you co-authored it, at one point, one of you, I forget which, says it was hard for us to remember who wrote what at a
Yeah.
certain point. And that to me is crazy, because I haven't written that much collaboratively in the past, and so that's crazy to not really know. Was this my passage? Was that my description, that kind of thing. So talk about that for a second. How was that?
Yeah, it was great. And I mean, I think for me, it was, and I said this several times before, but it was just super special to spend time as a, you grow up, you move away, still close with my folks, but we don't live in the same place. I don't see them constantly.
Mm-hmm.
It was special to um, be talking to my dad every day and working with my dad every day on this as a grown up. It's different time in life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Felt incredibly lucky to be able to spend that time with my dad
Sure.
as a 40-year-old. Now about the collaborative part, I remembered something that Peter Straub had said to my dad. Told me that Peter had said to him when they were writing Black House, and Peter said something like, "I want you to try to write a little bit like me, and I'm going to try to write a little bit like you." And
Gotcha.
I think that Peter had felt like when they wrote The Talisman that
Mm-hmm.
people had strong ideas about who had written what. I think that must have been what his thinking was.
Gotcha.
Uh, love Peter, by the way. I can't believe he's gone.
Yeah.
It's the world is definitely emptier without him. Beautiful guy, and I thought about what Peter had said, and when my dad and I started working on the book, one of the things that um, feel is really important when you're collaborating is that whoever's writing is sort of in charge. And so when I wrote, I could rewrite what he did. And when he wrote, he could rewrite what I did. And
Gotcha.
so that way you end up with a third voice that's
Sure.
nobody's.
Yeah.
And or it's somebody else. It's a third person almost. And then the other thing we did was we always left, the chapters have like 5, 6 parts. There would always be one part that I'd like leave a note for him, and I'd say, well, this is what happens here. We talked
Mm-hmm.
about this. You
Mm-hmm.
write that. And he would do the same for me. And so we would always have a part of each other's chapters.
Right.
And,
Right.
um, you
It's a
know,
it sounds a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds a little bit like I often have that with if I write a section and then I have somebody else edit it, they throw in their thoughts and edits on that, and then vice versa, the same thing would work. So it's almost like you're not rewriting somebody else's section, but you are adding your own spin or what have you to.
Yeah, you're not like wholesale rewriting the thing,
Yeah,
but you're
yeah.
adding scenes here. You're appending a detail.
Mhm.
You might have like, I think that a better way to say this one sentence is this. There's a few things you do. You're not making drastic changes usually. And if you were, you would talk to the other person about it. But I love to collaborate. And I've had a bunch of good experiences. I collaborated with my friend Mark Jude Poirier on a graphic novel.
Very cool.
I collaborated with my friend John McNally on an anthology. And I think that and I'm collaborating with my friend Jesse Kellerman on a comic book right now. And I just feel like in every case, and with my dad included, that the um, the whole endeavor rests on the faith you're putting into your collaborator and the idea that what they're doing is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I was thinking about this. I don't know if this metaphor works, but I was thinking the other day that when you're writing on your own, it's like you're putting all your faith in your vision of
Mm-hmm.
what it's going to be.
Sure.
And when you're writing with somebody else, you're putting all your faith, you're putting about half your faith in the shared vision, and you're putting the other half of your faith in the person themselves and
Sure.
in your belief in their talent and their however they're going to improvise and all the things that they're going to come up with.
Yep.
I don't know. It's almost like believing in the bridge instead of like the destination. Maybe
Right.
I don't
Right.
know. I'm working it. I'm working at this particular metaphor, Brian. I've been thinking about it a lot. So
Right. That's excellent. No, I like it. All right. So anyways, if you guys haven't read Sleeping Beauties, check it out. It's a blast. And one of the things that you mentioned in that I thought was really interesting is that when creative types if we're sitting around a table and there's you and there's an artist and there's another writer, what have you, we'll all be sitting around pitching ideas at one another, that kind of thing. That's
yeah,
kind of normal. But you mentioned that you did it in your family, like as a family dynamic. You guys did that a lot, which is I think a little bit different than some people, because a lot of times you don't have multiple creative types in the same family, right? Oftentimes there'll be one or two and that's it in a
I
family.
mean, there's
So
a certain amount of. I think that you're just spitballing like, what if this happened? I gotta admit, I do it a little bit. It's funny as I've gotten a little bit more uh I've gotten a little bit busier and maybe having more projects. I do a little less, what do you think of this idea, than here's the thing that I'm writing. What if this happened? Does that
right,
make
right.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
So
I
it's
get it.
sort of like uh
Yeah, it shifted a little bit.
I don't know. It's shifted a little bit. Maybe my brain is getting older or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I love sitting around and spitballing. But sometimes I also sometimes feel like the things that I spitball are the things I'm least likely to do. Right? Because once the idea hits the air,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
it like catches turns to smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yep.
the things that you don't talk about that you're like you're chewing away on, paragraph by paragraph,
Sure.
that
Well,
the ones you believe in the most.
there's that adage from writers, which is that like there's a lot of memes and things like that on social media for this kind of thing, but it's the idea when it's in your head is and you've got this, you're going forward strongly, and then the idea when you voice it and it's like, what? you know
Yeah, I always think about that with those Joe Esterhaas movies that he was selling. He's like writing them on a napkin, and he was getting
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
huge advances on the things. And there's something about that I totally get, which is that it's always better in your
In
imagination.
your head, yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's
it's
true.
just so hard um to match whatever, you know, if you just if you convince somebody with an idea and it lights them up, it's really hard to match that excitement with the actual piece of writing.
It is,
You
yeah.
know, because the person who is into it in a way that you can't see.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. And you're like, how am I going to match that? Yeah. So, so one thing that I wanted to touch on is you've written short stories, you've written novels, you also have written, for graphic novels, comic books, that kind of thing. So, what is the process like for you? How is it different based on what it is you're writing? Because for me personally, when I've written a novel, well, I've only written two, so but when I'm writing a novel, it's like I live with that thing every day, and you wake up thinking about it, and it's just this
yeah.
like a extra family member while you're sitting there writing it. Whereas a short story, oftentimes I'll get the idea, I'll jot a few scenes down, spend 2 or 3, 4 writing sessions doing it, and then it's kind of done, and then you just move on. So that's personally how I do it. How is it different for you in terms of the process?
Well, I find short stories are really difficult.
Mm.
Um, and it feels like um whatever works once never works a second time.
Okay.
And it's sort of like whatever and I think anytime I look at something I've published, there's always parts of it where I'm like, God, I don't even remember doing this,
Mhm.
or even better, I'm like, gosh, I did good there. It's like, what, how did I come up with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is like laughing at your own jokes. But when when I've written the novels, I've tended to feel, once the voice is set and I know where I'm going, it's more fun, and more relaxing, and but it's really hard to get to the place where you know the voice and you know where
Yeah.
you're going. And
Yeah.
whereas with short stories, uh, I have an expansive tendency that works against it,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
have a hard time figuring out the patterning a lot of more often than not. So,
Yeah.
I guess the difference is that they're both really hard, but sometimes I finish a short story and I feel like, gosh, how am I ever going to write another one? It's
Hmm.
so hard.
Hmm.
Whereas I never really feel that way with a novel. I also feel like,
Interesting.
and
Interesting.
I've not make it sound like I've written tons of novels. I haven't, but I always feel
Right.
like I could do that again.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's fascinating because I'm kind of the opposite because with novels it's not that I don't enjoy the process. I do. It's just it's like it takes a lot out of you. Whereas the short story, it's like bam, bam, bam. I just knock it out, have an idea for where this is going, go back in, fix a little bit of the language, good to go, on to the next one, that kind of thing. And so it's I love hearing I just love talking writing. I love hearing how different people do it. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's it's also like they're like a pop song or something, a good short story. I think about like there's that great Joe Lansdale short story. It's called like Incident on the something road, and
Mm-hmm.
the woman um ends up it's like her car breaks down, and then this lunatic chases her through the woods, and it turns out he's got like this layer of bones and horror, and he's been like killing people out in the woods in his like
Mm-hmm.
temple of death for a long time. And she has to defeat him, and then there is a twist
Mm-hmm.
when she gets back to her car.
Gotcha.
And so it's a great story. I think it was adapted for like a little, like for some anthology. That's it.
Okay.
It was awesome.
And
And,
this is
and
this is Joe
so,
Lansdale.
yeah, Joe Lansdale.
Yeah,
So,
I just had him on recently, and great guy.
yeah,
We had a blast talking. But he also I just heard today. I'm pretty sure it's he and his wife's 50th anniversary.
yeah, happy anniversary, Joe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Joe.
And so I the twist is like the hook of the story. You don't know it is, but that's the reason for it to exist, is for the twist that comes at the end. And I just don't feel like I get ideas like that often enough, or when I do, I can't figure out how to compress it. Maybe I got to talk to Joe and find out how he does that. But it's a brilliant story, and
Right.
it's challenging.
Yeah, it is, and I'm a little bit like you in the sense that even though writing shorts is easier for me than some of the other things, it's I'm expansive too. Like when I'm trying to find, in the past when I've been trying to find places to send short stories off, it's always like 5,000 words max, 3,500 words max, and I'm looking at my 12,000 word story going, oh jeez.
Yeah. No, I mean it is it's a difficult form, but the people, I mean, the best short story writers, it's a beautiful art. And
yeah, the ones who
I wish more people knew about it.
Yeah,
I feel like
absolutely. Yeah,
people know about short stories, but it's not something people go to the bookstore to buy.
Exactly, and that's actually one of our main focuses here at Starlite is shorts, because I love shorts, and I feel like they get really kind of short shrift in the larger literary market. So yeah, we're focusing on that. But the people who are amazing to me are the flash fiction writers. I have no idea. Like I just had somebody today send me something saying, hey, we're going to put the zine out in a couple months. Would you send me something? And I said, yeah, of course, no problem. And then she said the limit is 500 words, and I was like, oh, geez.
Yeah, that's almost like a different thing, because like I've read plenty of stories that are that short, but I don't have a great retention for them. It has to maybe it's they're over too fast or something, but I'll be like, wow, I really liked that, and then someone will be like, well, what was it about? And be like, I didn't retain. So
right.
Maybe that's the old brain too, though.
Right. So one thing that I thought was so interesting, and we touched on it earlier with the white jazz thing with Elroy, but one thing that I found that I thought was so interesting is that you were, I don't want to say forced, that's not the right way to put it, but you were essentially, you had to read these books for your dad when you were younger. It was your job, right? Quote unquote job. And what a great education. Like, obviously reading white jazz at 12, you didn't get it. Like I think I
was a little older, but I still did. I think I was older than that, but I still didn't get it. I think I was 14, 15, 16, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So, but still, what a great education, right? I mean, because these are books you wouldn't normally probably be reading, and all of a sudden you're forced to get, I mean, I think you mentioned Fellowship of the Ring at one point too, which is, I mean, that's a work, I mean, to get
I read I think it's a great thing to do. It's great to be able to read aloud, to have that as a skill. And I enjoyed reading around. And that's been I think on some level, that's been a guiding, almost, it's been a guiding force in my career. I don't tend to write the same kind of thing twice.
Right. Yeah.
My first book was a, straight ahead contemporary fiction. Second book was more of a comedy. I did the fantasy horror novel with my dad. This is like a sort of different kind of fantasy novel, like another world kind of fantasy novel.
Yeah.
So, and the comic book is a crime piece. It's a noir piece.
Oh, cool.
So I'm always trying to do something different. And I think that reading a lot of different books aloud on tape when I was a kid helped me led me in that direction, certainly.
Sure. I'll bet. So speaking of that, what is you're working on this comic book, like you mentioned now. What is next for Owen King?
That's next. I got a comic book coming out from Sigizzy, is the imprint of Image Comic Books.
Okay, yeah.
My co-writer is Jesse Kellerman, who's a fabulous crime novelist. He wrote The Genius. He wrote Pot Boiler, which was nominated for best novel by the Edgars one
I've heard of
year.
that one. Yeah.
Jesse's, unbelievable, and uh, just the coolest dude. Love working with him. I love working with Chris Ryle, who's the editor in chief of that imprint.
Very cool.
They've done some great comic books, and it's a different thing. It's more of like, in the mood of like a Donald Westlake
Okay.
crime novel. It's sort of funny,
Yeah.
but it's also pretty dark. So hopefully people are going to be into it.
That's awesome. All
Yeah.
right. Very cool. So
Look for it
talk
next year.
what's that?
Look for it next year.
Next year. Okay.
Early
Cool.
next year. Yeah.
So talk to me real quick. This will be the last thing we cover, but talk to me a little bit about something totally different, right? Like just outside of a lot of what we've been talking about. In 2020, you worked on The Stand, which was a TV series, correct?
It was, yeah.
Oh, okay. So to my embarrassment, I told you this earlier. I loved The Stand when I read that as a teenager, and quite frankly, I probably didn't get all of that then. But I did hammer my way through it. I had the one with the big Bernie Wrightson illustrations in it, which I loved.
Yeah.
And so read the book, loved it. I had no idea that they had even made the series. Like I mentioned earlier, no idea. So how was that process? And obviously different from your quote unquote normal life here. What was that like being a part of the series?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved working in the writer's room. I felt like I learned a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's a great experience. I mean, it is like, um, I mean, it's super collaborative because everybody's bringing something. Like the actors are bringing something, the set designers are bringing something, the director's bringing something, the showrunner, the other writers in the room. But I think sometimes it gets overlooked how collaborative, um, you know, almost every kind of writing is. I mean, people look at a novel and they're like, well, that person, she did it all by herself. But that's not true. I didn't write my novel all by myself. Like, I mean, I wrote the final draft all by myself, but like the copy editor was hugely influential. The editor was hugely influential. The people who made the art package, it recontextualizes the book. The illustrator, she brought this, a whole different thing to the book that's awesome, and like also influences it. It's the people who market the book, almost any kind of creative endeavor is super collaborative. And I don't know if anybody needs my advice, but I'll offer it anyways. And it's that when you're working on something, there is a time when you want to let as many talented people in as possible, right?
Sure.
Because they're all gonna, and you've got the Starlight Press. You've got issue number 2. You showed me before we started. It's like the art is so big, and the way that you edited the things are so big. The order of the stories is big. There's all these different things that are going into it, and people want to help you. They want to do the things that are going to present your work in the best possible light. And I think it's just so important to embrace that collaborative opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we're gonna end it on that, Owen. So first off, this is Owen's new book. It is called The Curator. Go out and get yourself a copy. It's a blast, honestly. It's a fantasy novel that is encompasses a whole number of topics, and it's a blast to read. He also had Sleeping Beauties, which he co-authored before that. That's a lot of fun. So get that if you can. And then also we've got his comic book, which is going to come out next year. So have a look for that. It would be remiss of me if I didn't include. Also, this is Starlite Pulp review number 2. This is out right now. Just came out in June. Anyway, it's recent. And so 14 different authors, all subgenres of pulp. We got sci-fi, we got westerns, we got crime and noir. We got horror. So so pick that up if you can. And otherwise, Owen, thanks so much for being here tonight. You were a blast.
Thanks, Brian.
Absolutely, man.
In this topsy